engaging our partners, India, Brazil, the PRC, Russia, about the need to transform this very important pivotal instrument, such as the UN Security Council, for all the reasons that I have actually raised to you today. So I thought it's important that we start there, about the need to transform this Security Council, and I hope many of you moving from this Brics discussion will now appreciate why priority 5 of our chairpersonship of the Brics speaks about deepening about multilateralism and global governance institution. But then the second issue, and I know there is a number of scholars here, economic scholars, is about the Bretton Woods institutions. And when we speak about Bretton Woods institutions, primarily we speak about obviously your multilateral development banks that we know, such as your World Bank, and we speak about your International Monetary Fund, isn't it so? Now, I hope that all of you know, I think based in this room, if you are country representatives, that all of your countries are shareholders of IMF. So I've heard some of you politically, you speak bad about the IMF, isn't it so? We have looked at some Twitter linkages of some of you. Your people is here what I call are very radical young people, which is very good. But you are supposed to also have young people that are very radical, but are also very intellectually astute. Now you can't be radical and say all the bad things about the IMF, whilst your country are shareholders of the IMF. Okay. So, do we agree that all of you are members of the IMF? Because I have here on my one hand the countries that are not members of the IMF. But on one hand, so all of you here are members of the IMF. You are shareholders of the IMF. You have a minute shareholding, but you are shareholders of the IMF. So before you say that let's do away with the IMF, your taxes and the taxes of your forefathers are there in the IMF. All right? Do you guys understand what I'm saying? And I'll invite you obviously to look at what I call your voting structure of the IMF and its concomitant challenges. And then once again, ladies and gentlemen, look, you have basically 3 countries in the IMF with the biggest, what I call voting right. Okay? So voting, like democratic voting, it's important, isn't it so? It's a franchise that you use. If you don't have voting privileges, you feel disenfranchised, isn't it so? So for most of us, we have been seized with the importance about the democratic possibility that voting brings about in our lives. So in the IMF, your 3 biggest shareholders is the United States of America, Japan, and the People's Republic of China. And then you have everyone else that have a shareholding that are quite minute, all right? Quite minute. And in the entirety of the 189 or so members of the IMF, you have only one country that has a privilege of a voting right, of a veto right. So this one, maybe it's a bit better than the Security Council, eh? Because remember, the Security Council, you have 5 that have veto rights. So in the IMF, you have only 1. And that is the United States of America. There's a privilege of a veto right. And that's why we think, as South Africa, obviously, when as young people you speak about multilateralism, it's not about doing away with the IMF, doing away with the World Bank. It's to change its content, its programs, and the way it operates. That is deepening of global governance. It's deepening of global governance is where you toil, where you work hard, you ensure young people en masse gets ascendancy to these very important institutions. In fact, in this room, we're supposed to have had 10 young people that are staff members of the IMF, that are progressives in their thinking. If we don't have that, it means we are putting a bus driver in an Airbus. It's not reconcilable, ladies and gentlemen. It's not reconcilable. So what we must ask for the Southern Africa Brics Association, Rob, it's for us or for you to start to build appropriate linkages with young people that are practitioners in those structures. Remember, in the executive of IMF, I think you have, 24 directors there. And I think I can make a confession. You know, I'm Catholic, so part of us to, redeem your sins, you need to confess. All right? So part of my confession is that if you look at the higher echelon of IMF, those 24 directors, is what the South African young people call the old guard. I don't know in your countries what you call it. It means it's the older generation that are in the executive of the IMF. Your generation finds expression in the management levels of the IMF. But my submission to you, that is an important structure for engagement. And I'm raising it because if you guys can remember that during the COVID-19 pandemic, we had huge difficulties to allow the IMF to issue what I call special drawing rights for, in particular, your less developed countries, the majority of which is in Africa. We had that type of very hard engagement with the IMF. They have taken a principled decision to do as such, and they have started to make and roll out and honor certain aspects of that commitment. But that debate, ladies and gentlemen, of the special drawing rights, the ones that champion it, ourselves in this room, were the ones that have championed it. But we were not the prime beneficiaries of that debate. We are not the prime beneficiaries of that debate. All right? So we champion it on behalf of your global south, on behalf of your less developed countries. And there was an agreement that our political narrative that we made is genuine and it's important. But when they converge, the major beneficiaries of that debate has been your more industrialized market. All right? And we should not be surprised, by the way, Chair. We should not be surprised because remember with this war in Ukraine, there was a big debate about food security, food insecurity in Africa, remember? Yes. The African Union went there, we engaged hard with the Russian Federation, we engaged with Ukraine, Then they agreed. They agreed with the Black Sea to ensure there's a movement in the corridors there of the ships, the fleets, and remember the demining process was undertaken because of this room of people. But when the grain was allowed to go through, the prime beneficiaries of that plea, of that prayers, has not been us. The prime beneficiaries, ladies and gentlemen, has been your industrialized north in terms of this grain issue. So remember, with your special drawing rights during COVID-19, that is what happened, isn't it so? With this current war in Ukraine, that is what happened. So I'm saying to you, our political foresight, it is a positive contribution to the world thinking about equitable, what is fair, and about social justice. But that thinking more than often, obviously, gets abused. So how do we take the nobility that from the side of the Brics leaders? How do we take the sincerity of the Brics leaders and ensure it gets converted? That ambition that we are having gets matched. There's an intersection between the sincere ambitions of the Brics leaders that is premised on social justice and what is the thinking and the conduct of your more industrialized north. How do we do it? And that is hopefully one of the issues in your discussions, ladies and gentlemen, that you should engage in. But you can't walk away from the IMF. Remember, you are shareholders. All right? You can't walk away. If you walk away, all the resources of your countries, of your parents, you can't ask that, I want my money back. So global governance says let's deepen our participation in those institutions. We need more young economists from these countries being present here to make sure that we sway the political fortunes of the world. And then the third issue that I wanted to raise probably is the last issue, because I said let me just raise the most critical issues that we obviously should be engaged on. And that is, ladies and gentlemen, the G20. Remember the G20, you have it's your most industrialized countries there, isn't it so? So in the G20, the G7 is also present. The most industrialized nations are there. And then in the G20, you obviously has a multilateral organ also present in the form of your European Union, your EU. So you have 19 states, member states, and then you have a multilateral organization such as the European Union that makes it G20. And there is a debate which we hope that under the presidency of India, that are currently chairing the G20, will be actually upheld and advanced. That the African Union, as a chief representative of 55 African states, should, like the EU, have a role to play in the G20. All right? Because there is no debate about the EU, but what we are saying that as the premium African multilateral organ, the African Union should be represented. South Africa is there, but remember we are there based on our own economic credentials. But what we are saying that the EU, as a multilateral organization, should equally be accompanied by the African Union. Because the objective of the G20, ladies and gentlemen, the objective of the G20 is to ensure that the development mantra, there is no recurrence of the 2008 financial collapse of markets, etc. Isn't it so? Yeah. There is no reoccurrence of the type of funding conflicting mechanisms that we have experienced towards COVID-19. The objectives of the G20 should be to ensure that when we speak about climate change, climate financing, we speak about your loss and damages fund. We speak about nationally determined contributions and our commitment towards the UNFCCC, that we are on par and that the G20 will be able then to intersect with your G77 and China that represents your developing countries. So there's an opportunity obviously for all of our countries to continue to engage, because what we are speaking about, if you look at your priorities of Brics, your just transition is there, isn't it so? Your skills development, education is there. But you won't be able to do that if substantively, in your rear view, as Brics members and as partners to the Brics member countries, in your rear view mirror, you can champion your Brics to bring about this systematic change in global and financial architecture. But if you don't have a concomitant change in all these other very important multilateral organizations, you won't be able to have a change. Ladies and gentlemen, I conclude. And I thought I must conclude with just with one quote. Remember I spoke about this gentleman that I loved earlier on. I think you can recall his name, eh? Yeah. He says, and this is a quote from Hegel, he says, nothing in the world can be accomplished without passion. Nothing in the world, if you don't have fortitude, you don't have vigor, you don't have energy, nothing as young people you will be able to accomplish without passion. And I want to quote with a quote that says, this economic revolution, ladies and gentlemen, needs a contingency of young people that are equal to their task with regards to both their numbers and quality, as well as their composition. And we need a contingency of young people that are able and that are willing to fulfill to the highest degree possible the requirements of the economic and financial tasks